I'm an assistant professor at Simon Fraser University, and I just want to start off by acknowledging that I am currently speaking to you from the unceded territories of the Coast Salish, the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish people. And while it's always important, I think, to acknowledge the land where we're located and to know what that means, I think when we're talking about green infrastructure, and in particular equity in green infrastructure, it's really important that we understand different ways of knowing, being, and connecting to the land, and understanding the history of the land with which we stand. So just want to acknowledge where I am coming from today. So I was asked to speak about my, research and my work on green infrastructure, and particularly with a focus on equity. And I thought it'd be really useful to talk about the implementation, or how can we approach green infrastructure implementation from an equity lens. So the maps we see on the screen here, the one with the red markings on it. So these are all maps of Metro Vancouver. So the two top ones are Metro Vancouver, while the bottom one is just the city of Vancouver. The one with the red is a surface temperature map that was taken in on June 30th of this past summer, so 2021. And this is when we experienced a heat dome, so really intense heat wave in Metro Vancouver, something that is really unprecedented for this region. The map with the green is tree cover canopy. And if you were to look at those two maps overlaid, what you would see is where there's red, there's not much green. And also what you would see is that if you were to zoom in further, the areas that are more red or less green are actually areas where there's lower socioeconomic, so areas of lower socioeconomic status. So we're seeing areas or neighborhoods and individuals who are already experiencing different vulnerabilities, are at higher risk of things like heat waves because of the lack of tree cover canopy and green infrastructure that exists within their neighborhoods. The map on the bottom there is from the city of Vancouver, and it's current list of green infrastructure assets. And it lists the different types of green infrastructure that the city has implemented. And again, what you would see is that where green infrastructure is currently located is not in areas that are in need or that would really benefit. In addition to this, there are already areas that actually have higher tree cover canopy and other types of green spaces. So equity is important. In particular, equity implementation is important because in Canada, we don't actually have, municipalities aren't mandated to implement green infrastructure the way that we have in the US. So we don't have to do green infrastructure. It's something that municipalities or organizations would choose to do. And then when they're choosing to do so, a lot of cities are actually doing it much more from what we would consider to be an opportunistic perspective. So when they can, an area is being rezoned or redeveloped, and there is an opportunity for both to sort of intervene in the landscape, but also for funding, where we're not looking at green infrastructure implementation in terms of what areas or neighborhoods would actually benefit the most from said interventions. So I'm really sort of interested in looking at how can we prioritize equity in our decision-making processes. So when we're thinking about where might we implement green infrastructure, we can do so that more benefits can occur. It's really common within environmental justice, climate justice, and other sort of justice-related fields to rely or to look at the three forms of equity or three dimensions of equity. And the most common ones are distributional, recognition, and procedural. And they look at distribution, so thinking it much more geographically, so looking at the distribution of goods, but also infrastructure and services across a city or across a region, across whatever the sort of geographic bounds you're interested in. Recognition is much more about acknowledging existing and past injustices that people have faced and thinking about the needs of equity deserving communities and acknowledging why those needs exist. And then procedural, thinking much more from engagement and participatory processes. So one of the things that we did was actually look at existing policies through this lens to see, are cities actually thinking about the different ways that they might think about justice and equity when they're looking at green infrastructure. So we'll come back to this, but I just wanted to sort of lay out that this is a commonly used set of dimensions when we're looking at equity from an environmental and climate justice perspective. But what I wanted to do today was to talk about two tools that can support the implementation of green infrastructure. I want to acknowledge that these tools are targeted to governments, or particularly municipal governments, and more so about municipal governments being able to make decisions around their own land. So we're thinking public infrastructure here, or thinking about different types of interventions that would happen in terms of on land that is so that they have responsibility over. So less encouraging private landowners to do things, but what can governments do in-house? Because I'm really interested in pushing equity and equitable implementation and equitable decision-making within organizations that actually have decision-making power, so that it's not something that people kind of have to fight for, but it's something that becomes embedded in the way that we make decisions about infrastructure across the board. So the first tool is thinking about opportunity or decision-making processes. So many municipal governments will have different types of tools. Sometimes they're spreadsheets, sometimes they're like scorecards, different types of factors that they collect and potentially even give a numeric score to in terms of how they make decisions. So the city of Vancouver is an example of a city that has such a tool where they have the opportunity tool specifically for green infrastructure, where they look at a number of different factors and they provide them with different scores. And those scores tell them that if they should pursue to implement green infrastructure in a particular site or location or not. So in terms of thinking about those three dimensions of equity, myself and Nicole Zhang, one of my former master's students, came up with different criteria that would encourage municipalities to implement this into their decision-making process. So thinking about co-benefit potential. So again, we know that green infrastructure has a number of different, sort of co-benefits, but if we could actually acknowledge those and think about how they might provide specific communities or locations with more than one benefit, that could be a way to sort of increase equity in terms of the way we make decisions. Benefit and burden. So thinking about not just the benefits of green infrastructure, but also the burdens that might exist as well for those who do not have green infrastructure or other types of interventions that might have negative impacts. So being more aware of those. And then economic opportunities. One of the things we found was that in some cities, there's actually specific mandates in place to support BIPOC, low income, or female-owned businesses, or to train individuals. So are there opportunities to sort of spread distributionally money through jobs and training? In terms of recognition, the City of Vancouver currently has a disproportionately impacted communities GIS layer that they use when they trying to make equity related decisions. And I'm going to get more into the use of the GIS map in a sec, but to really think about the fact that this information needs to be disaggregated when you're making decisions. So right now there's one layer that includes anything from single family households, immigrant households, low income households, racialized populations. All of that is just one thing. So there's really an importance to break that down. And then historical context to really acknowledge, have certain areas, are certain areas more likely to have experienced or sort of received different types of infrastructure or not. So being aware of past funding and infrastructure versus current opportunities. And finally, procedural. How can we engage communities to be part of the decision-making process? Is there a desire for green infrastructure? Do they even know what green infrastructure does or what it can do? Have equity denied or equity deserving communities been in contact, and have they engaged meaningfully in these processes? And that can include, sort of education, but also being involved in planning, design, construction, operation, and maintenance. And there's some really great examples of cities that are including folks in sort of maintenance and really encouraging stewardship of land through these programs. Are there education opportunities similar to the training ones? And in particularly with settler colonial context where we find ourselves in today, it's important to think about Indigenous perspectives and thinking about Indigenous voices, culture, and knowledge being integrated into projects where appropriate. But again, acknowledging the land that we stand and live and work on. The other tool is the GIS suitability analysis. I'm almost finished. Is that what you're telling me? Yeah. Cool. And again, this is something that's used across municipalities in a variety of different ways. And we just developed or sort of brought together from existing resources 4 different variables that should be kept in mind. Built environment variables that really cover sort of the more technical and environmental components of green infrastructure. investment variables, so really focusing on areas of urban growth, but also looking at past capital investment locations. Looking at socio-demographic variables, and as I said before, the importance of disaggregating that data so that you can provide different layers depending on target audiences, or being able to understand communities and locations and individuals differently. And then thinking about accessibility and health variables, as well as being a little bit different to socio-demographic. And so we think that having more of this information, I guess a big part of equitable decision making is actually about data, and the data that we collect and the data we have available to us to be able to promote better decision making. So in closing, it's really about sort of acknowledging and sort of understanding and internalizing that green infrastructure implementation or decision making goes beyond technical and biological considerations, and we need to think much more in terms of financial, equity, political, institutional, cultural, and so on. And if we continue to neglect this, we're going to continue to perpetuate existing inequities and create new ones in terms of who has access to the benefits of green infrastructure. So our hope is that if more municipalities can incorporate these types of process or variables or dimensions into their work, we can actually lead to more equitable places through green infrastructure implementation. And that's me. Thank you. And apologies for all the technological problems.
Awesome. No problem. Thank you so much, Andrian, for doing that on a very compressed timeline. I really appreciate it. Next up, we have Irene Ogata from the city of Tucson, where Irene works as an urban landscape manager. So Irene, are you able to share your screen?
Hey, I'm working on it too. You know, when we think we have it all figured out, right? Alrighty. I had it on the screen.
I do have your slides, Irene, so if you want me to, I can also show.
That's right, you do have my slides. So that might be the thing to do. Okay, here we go. Let's see. It's trying to open. Is it sharing?
Not yet.
No. Well, is it sharing? For some reason, it's not popping up on mine. So you might have to load up yours. That would be great. Thank you.
There we go.
I see it. Yep, I see it on my screen. Now I have to close it on my screen so I don't see it. And get back into Zoom so I see what you guys are seeing. All right. Thank you again for the Green Communities for inviting me to this Living Cities Forum. And just as Adriana had said, we too would like, or at least I would like to recognize that here in Tucson, we are on the lands Tucson, which is the lands of the Tohono O'odham and the Yaqui tribes who were here 2,000 years before we were even here. And so thank you for that. Okay, next slide. You can forward to the next slide. Are you on the next? Oh. Next slide. Christine?
So yeah, I am circling through the slides. Is it not working for folks?
I'm still seeing, oh, let's see. Yep, okay. So if you could go back, I'm sorry. I wasn't seeing it. So, oh, from here, let's go to the next slide. All right, so the perspective that I'm coming from is really from the perspective of the Green Infrastructure Leadership Exchange. This is a national organization of municipalities, but it also includes North America. So Vancouver is a member of this leadership exchange. And a lot of probably what I'm going to say was somewhat covered by Christine in her opening, and also about Andrea and what she had. So mine might be relatively short. So in the Green Infrastructure Leadership Exchange, we have several learning circles, of which equity is one. And the GILE finds that equity needs to be embedded in everything that we look at in terms of green infrastructure. Much as Adrienne was saying, how do we institutionalize these concepts? And so we realize as a membership of various municipalities that we cannot work on this issue alone, not only nationally, but also institutionally within our own jurisdictions. And so we've been fortunate to be able to get 2 grants to be discuss and draw upon the internal membership, but also to share all of this collectively with our jurisdictions, and then come back to each other to talk about what are we missing, or what are some of the difficult obstacles that we're encountering, so that we can keep moving forward. So when I say we are the individual program managers. Oops, went too fast. Steve, yep. So we are collectively trying to advance equity through green storm infrastructure nationally through the North American cities. So here are some of the cities that have collaborated on the 2 grants. So as I'm saying, there's a lot of cities across the nation and also in Canada that we are working with. Okay, next slide. So what we've been fortunate enough to do is come up with a guide. So why are we doing it? One is we want to, as even Adriana has been talking about, is defining these industry equity goals. So we also realize there are 3 dimensions to equity. She called them distributional, recognitional, and procedural. Ours are termed a little bit different, but the concepts are probably the same. So the goals that we are trying to do as a group is to prepare ourselves internally to doing this. And everything is centered upon community. How do we bring that community in, even as we're having these discussions? And then as Adriana showed us, the GIS stuff, citing these investments, putting some concrete numbers. But I think community also needs to understand how we're coming up with those numbers. That's why they always have to be at the table with us as we're developing even these criteria standards. And then how they're benefits driven, and also that economic piece. And then what's been important, especially to the city of Atlanta, is that displacement issue, that sometimes when we improve sites, we tend to improve it to up the real estate values, and then the people we're working for then cannot afford to live where we're trying to improve. So all of that has to do it. So the best practices is another part that we're putting in this tool. And so planning and what to do, and then also checking, always checking with the community if we're doing it right. And then as we act and implement it, are we putting metrics so we understand how well we're doing, or what areas we need to make improvements? Metrics is always difficult. So we're still learning also in terms of equity, how do we place metrics, whether we're succeeding or not? A lot of it tends to be anecdotal, but those anecdotals are very important. And so what we're saying is it's better to have a little data that we use to help move the initiatives forward than to have a lot of data that we're collecting that we won't be really using. Next slide. So the part about centering communities is very important. And so even as Adrienne was talking about the GIS piece, a lot of our communities also use that standard, and we develop criterias to help us pinpoint where are the areas that need to be worked on, because those are either the hotter communities, they have less canopy, there's more flooding. But I think what we need to also realize is to help the community understand what these values are telling us. And then based on those values, are we then helping them, or are we missing something that they need to inform us about? So again, community is always very important. Next slide. So when we talk about this, both through this leadership exchange, there's also another group in North America called the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, and they also have their own DEI program. So I think in all the tools, when I read them, it's all about trying to create that common language, although there probably won't ever be a common language, because each of our locations are slightly different. But hopefully we can at least collectively be able to talk about how this inequity exists and how it's been institutionalized and how we can break that chain. And so how do we overcome the obstacles? So this is a little graphic that's put out by the R.J. Woods Foundation. You know, they're a health organization. You've probably seen it, the difference between equity and equality. And when I looked at this the other day, it occurred to me in the equity piece, what's missing there is there may be people who don't want to ride a bike, you know, who may not even know how to ride a bike. So I think that piece needs to be put in there also. And again, that has to do with getting back to the community and asking them what is important to them. Next slide. I think that's the end. Yep. So that's the end for me, short and sweet. There's this tool guide. In the beginning slide, there was a little picture of the equity guide that we just published. I can ask the exchange if I can share it with all of you, because we are a group of municipalities. We tend not to put things out for everybody without permission from the membership, because we are creating these tools for us. And if any of you who are in municipalities would like to join the leadership exchange, you can Google Green Infrastructure Leadership Exchange, and there's a button there on how to become a member. And that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Irene. Yeah, and I can also, whatever folks are comfortable with sharing with the group, I can share those out with everyone. I have all your emails through Eventbrite or through other correspondence. All right. Next up, we have Vincent Ouellette-Jovan from the Montreal Urban Ecology Center, who will be talking about how they've been working with community to do some green infrastructure projects in Montreal. So.
Thank you, Christine. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see it. We can see notes too, so it's not in present yet, but.
No, you should be good.
Yes, perfect.
Oh, awesome. Got it. Okay. Well, thank you, Christine. Thank you, Irene. Thank you, Andrea. It was really interesting. So my name is Vincent Ouellette-Jovan. I'm with the Montreal Urban Ecology Center here in Montreal, or Tiohtià:ke. And we've been a little bit more into the theoretical aspects of it. So now let's get to the more practical aspects and ground with real examples part of the presentations. So maybe what we would call the procedural criteria of equity, that's what we're going to look at. So how to involve communities in sustainable stormwater management of Montreal's alleyways. So the Montreal Urban Ecology Center, we're a nonprofit organization that was created in 1996, and it was created by citizens that were committed to transforming their community. And we worked to propose some practices, policies to create more ecological and democratic and healthy cities. And so I'll talk to you about the Ruelle Bleu Verte project, or Blue Green Alley project. I'll say it in English, but every name, when you're going to see it, it's going to be French. And how we decided to involve the communities inside the project. So first of all, what is a Blue Green Alley? Well, it stems from the Green Alley network in Montreal, which is over 400 green alleys where citizens have taken over their alleyways behind their house and transformed them with more green to make them living spaces. And basically, a Blue-Green Alley is sort of a play on that, and we added a little dimension. So it's an alley where the design and the stormwater management are planned in an innovative and participatory way. And what I mean by that is that the first aspect of planning a Blue-Green Alley is that we disconnect the gutters and redirect the water in green infrastructures, which is located both on public and private property. And so this particular sharing of infrastructure between the public and the private sector, we refer to that as mutualization, which by definition is just the sharing of resources, whether they be human resources, material resources, between the private sector and the public sector to achieve a certain goal. Here, it's to have green infrastructure. And before our project, it was not possible to actually manage the water from a private property in the public land. So this is an innovation that we had to work on to be able to make this project. But the second aspect, which is really important to us, is that we take this opportunity while we're doing the green infrastructure to design the living spaces by and for the community. We have many goals with the project. So we have, rainwater management, of course, sustainable rainwater management. We want to prove that climate change adaptation is feasible, so have a sort of demonstration of that. We want to experiment some innovative practices, and we want to increase community involvement in the improvement of their living spaces. Today, we'll focus a little bit more on the community involvement aspect as it relates to equity, but we'll see some innovative practices that we've tried to integrate, especially about alternative modes of governance for green infrastructure projects. So in terms of community involvement, I always like to share this particular slide. We share it a lot at the Montreal Urban Ecology Center. It's the participation ladder. So it's all the different ways you can integrate citizens into making decisions about a certain project. From the lowest level at the bottom, which is basically just informing citizens about a project that's going to happen in their area, to level 5, which is the highest level of participation for the communities, where they not only get to be informed or consulted, but they actually decide about the project. And the Blue Green Alley project sits squarely at number 5. It's really a decide together partner type of project. So let me tell you a bit more about this history so you'll get a better perspective on that. So the Blue Green Alleyway project started in 2011 with the production of a service offer by Vinci Consultants, which is urban planning firm in the city of Montreal. And they proposed the concept of a Blue-Green Alley as a solution for rainwater management at a larger scale for the city of Montreal. And from then on, eventually many partners joined the project through what we call the Alliance Ruelle Bleu Verte. So it's an innovative partnership with 5 members in it. So there's the Montreal Urban Ecology Center, of course, us. There's also 2 community organizations, the Collectif C'est à nous and the Société d'Habitation Populaire de l'Est de Montréal, or CHAPEM, as we like to call them. And there's also 2 urban planning firms, the Atelier Bleu and Vinci Consultants. So all of us make up the directing committee of the Alliance, and we take all decisions together. We decide where the project goes together. So the community organizations are directly involved in the decision-making of the entire project. So the plans, the conception, the direction we go, our objectives, everything. And it's with these 2 community organizations that we chose the pilot projects. We have 2, one in the Mercier Hochelaga Maisonneuve borough, so it's a turquoise alley. And we have another one in the Sud-Ouest borough, which is the Bâtiment 7 alley. And today we'll focus a bit more on the Bâtiment 7 alley. It was chosen to move forward first simply because it was slightly simpler. There was only 2 owners to deal with, the Cet à Nous collective and the City of Montreal. So it was a bit easier for us to manage only 2 than many more landowners. I won't get much into the details of what is the Bâtiment 7, but it is an extremely interesting project and demonstration of citizen reappropriation. So just a small history, in the early 2000s, these were buildings that were owned by the Canadian National Railway Company, and they were sold to a private real estate company for $1. And it's through citizen protest and organizing that eventually the community gained the ownership of these buildings and these lands. And now they're managed by the community through the Cet à Nous collective. So it's really interesting. Google it. It's a fascinating project. But we'll focus more now on the alley. And so the projects were really conceptualized with the citizens through a series of workshops. So we organized many workshops with the collective Cet à Nous Dead Center. There were environmental awareness workshops, some co-design workshops, technical greening workshops, and we validated all the final plans with the community. We'll also work for it's going to be built during the spring and summer of 2022. So we'll work as well on how to plant trees, and we'll have an integration with the community. And all these activities led to the designs that I'm going to show you today. Not many people have seen it, so you can feel very special today. So these are the plans for the alley. So you see in brownish, you have the walkable path. In blue, you have the rain gardens and bioswales. In green, you have the plant beds. And in what I would say very sad yellow is the boardwalk that lets people go around the building. And so the goal that was identified is to have some green infrastructures that were interesting to look at, that made the water visible, that were pleasing to the eye, but also that would bring back the water into sight. So we have some rain wheels that will be installed where the water will activate the wheel. When the rain falls, we'll have some rain chains that will replace opaque gutters that will let the passerbys see the water as it goes down. We'll also, well, all the plans that were chosen by the participants according to the needs and desires of the community. There's even some spaces that were left purposefully undesigned. So we kept them blank so that the community can decide what's going to be there. They wanted some space for spontaneity that was really important to them. And so we purposely kept some places undesigned so they're going to be able to plant what they want or transform the spaces, put benches if they want, really whatever they want to do in the future that they haven't quite put their mind to it right away. And so quick lessons that we learned, which of course, integrating community organizations in the decision-making structure leads to projects that are closer to the needs of the community itself. And that's something that's not really surprising. For example, recently, there were some concerns that were brought up because the Bâtiment 7, they want to have some childcare services, and childcare services facilities have some requirements for outdoor space for children to play. And that would overlap with the blue-green alley where there's a green infrastructure. But the Bâtiment 7 is on the leading team. We were able to address the situation and correct it very easily. But also what we do see is that having the organizations in the government body also means that they get the money and resources to do the work. It's a lot, it's labor intensive to get all this information. They are experts at what they do at their living spaces. And so if we provide the resources, they have the opportunity to do the work. And they also grow through the process because we give them money, time, and they can develop their staff and organization. If you're curious about the project, you can go on the website, unfortunately only in French, ruelbleuVerte.com. But if you're interested into our approach at Montreal Urban Ecology Center, you can go on to participatoryplanning.ca. We have some resources if you're interested into developing this participatory approach. And of course, if you want some examples and resources, also the Montreal Urban Ecology Center, but then again, only in French, I'm sorry. If you have any questions, here's my email, don't hesitate. It will be a pleasure to answer. And of course, thanks to the organizations that funded this work that I'm presenting today. And that's it on my end. I'm gonna stop sharing. Excellent.
Awesome. Thank you, Vincent. Alrighty, last but most definitely not least, we have Katia Rena, who is going to be sharing about the DPAVE work that they are leading in Portland, Oregon. So Katia, I see you have it pulled up. It's looking good.
Did it work?
I think so.
Cool.
Awesome.
Good afternoon to most of you. Good morning to me. My name is Katia Rena. I use she, aya pronouns, and I'm coming to you from Portland, Oregon, which is the stolen lands of the Confederate tribes of the Siletz Indians, the Confederate tribes of the Grand Ronde, Clackamas, and the Cowlitz. And I'm here from DPAVE, which is a nonprofit here in Portland. So I'm going to try and do this as timely as possible because I know we're a little over time, but essentially DPAVE empowers disenfranchised communities to overcome the social and environmental injustices that impact us. We're trying to basically get rid of pavement, transform overplayed places, and create resilient community green spaces. And we do this through promoting workforce development, education, advocating for policy change, all which is tied to undoing manifestations of systemic racism. That last part usually gets folks, so I like to focus on that a little bit. Most of you are familiar with redlining. I won't go too much into it, but essentially there are areas in cities in the United States and Canada that were intentionally disenfranchised, intentionally left out of development, which leads also to environmental development and development of green spaces. These areas are predominantly where Black and Brown people live and where low-income folks live. And as many of you probably know, there's all these studies that are coming out that actually show that these areas are in fact the hottest places. So places that were historically redlined and historically disenfranchised are now in fact the hottest places in our major cities. And these are some maps, you can find them. They actually have quite a few of them. Sorry, I'm just making sure I'm not missing anything in chat. These are some just basic maps as well. You can see the hottest areas are in fact the most low income areas. I won't go into too much of it, but I just encourage you all to check out what your city looks like. I also won't go too much into this because you're all green infrastructure nerds like me, but essentially pervious surfaces allow for water to go through, impervious surfaces do not. Depaving reduces stormwater runoff, it reduces the pollutants in our waterway, and it also mitigates flooding. And we also always put in plants, these plants that help, not only slow down runoff, but also filter the water before it goes right back into our rivers here in Portland. I also think some of the earlier speakers did an amazing job of already talking about how to site select. Some of the things that we use that I think stand out to us is looking at sort of before we choose a site, we think about who it's actually serving. Is it serving a BIPOC community? Are we helping folks that can't do this project unless we can help them? We're a really small organization. We can't go to every person that wants to do DPAVE. So we are very selective. Are there other green spaces nearby? Is the school serving mostly low-income students? Is it a Title I school? What's the walk score, things like that. These are all things that we consider before we actually begin the process. I'm going to be focusing more this presentation on an example project, which is in Powell Butte Elementary. This school is located in Southeast Portland in the Centennial School District. One of the very first things that we did with this school is actually just showed up and asked the kids, what do you want to see here? I think this is really important to especially engage students and communities that have been historically disenfranchised. So maybe their parents and their grandparents did not get an opportunity to have any say in what's going on in their community, but we're going to try and give that back to these kids. So we feel like that's step one, is asking the kids, especially the little ones who are going to get to actually see the project get into fruition, asking them, what kind of things do you want to see? And so in this image, you can see these kids are voting on whether they want to see a basketball court, a nature play area, a maze, a climbing wall, and they all get to put dots based on first choice, second choice, and third choice. We also asked kids to draw out what they'd like to see. And we kind of just told them the sky's the limit, you know, just use your imagination. What do you want to see? We got some water slides in there. But yeah, so we let them just sort of explore the idea of what could be here. And we feel like that's also really important. And we're very clear that we're not going to be able to build everything you draw. We don't want to overpromise things, especially to kiddos, but we do just tell them that it's important to imagine what what your green space can look like. We take all those responses back to some partners that we have here. We work with Greenworks, which is a landscape architecture firm that has provided some pro bono services for us. And they came up with 2 concepts, and then we came back to the school and we asked the kids to vote on which concept they'd like. So this is us at the homecoming parade in 2019, asking the kids what they'd like to see. And we made it pretty interactive. So kids could put Post-it notes with notes saying, you know, I really like this, I don't really like that. Or if they just wanted to give us any type of feedback. We're trying really hard to expand our feedback system and just really making it as open as possible, where they can tell us how we're doing and tell us how they're feeling at all times. We feel like that's a really important practice. So you can see the kiddos here voting on their favorite design. And the winning design is what we actually we're going to build out. Another thing that we did is we ended up reaching out to Alex Chu, who is a local muralist here in town. And he did his own community outreach, which was incredible. It's really amazing when we can find partners that also believe in the power of talking with kids directly and empowering families. And he took it upon himself to actually reach out to families in the Powell Butte community and teachers and staff. And he took pictures of them eating different foods. This is the wall right outside the cafeteria. So the theme was sort of food and plants. And some of these drawings are actually drawings the kids made of themselves that he actually put on the wall. And the images of the children that you see are actual students that attend Powell Butte Elementary. So the idea that kids literally see themselves reflected in design is pretty powerful. And I think he told me that I think it's 6 or 8 different languages and ethnicities represented in just this mural. So that's pretty cool. This is the morning of Depave Day. So we pre-cut the asphalt into sort of small brownie pieces, we call them, little squares, so they're easier to pry up. And we invite the community to come out and help us pull up the asphalt. Is this the most time efficient way to do things? Absolutely not. We believe in the power of actually having people get their hands dirty and actually be a part of removing the asphalt. So yeah, we could have an excavator come out and pull it up, but that's not as fun. And we want people to sort of feel that gratifying feeling of ripping up asphalt. I think there's some sort of, just something about working together. And I would think of depaving as a way of also re-indigenizing a land, because we're removing this horrible material and giving it back to the land back to nature, and kind of making it so that plants that were there before all this infrastructure came can thrive again. So this is the morning of. It's 7,400 square feet of asphalt. I think I have a little clip here. Let's see if it works. So that's kind of what it looks like. You pull one up, you smack it down, and then you have the smaller pieces. That's really great too, because then the kids can pick up those pieces. So we have a little job for the kids to do too. So we actually have 6, 7, 10-year-olds, all ages, and folks also that have different abilities can participate. Just some day of photos. This kid's a rock star. I think he's like 10, and he just hauls this. It's pretty amazing. That's one of our board members' daughters standing on all the pile of asphalt. She's really excited with the pry bar. That's the vice principal. The vice principal came out, and the principal was there too. And that's sort of what it looks like at the very end. And after that, we work with contractors to build it out. I do want to talk a little bit, that's the whole crew. That's all of us at the end. I do want to talk a little bit about workforce development, because that's a huge part of what we do as well. So apart from volunteer force, we also like to work with contractors that are BIPOC-owned businesses and also local. So this is GPT Construction, Bencho, who's on the left, and his two brothers on the right. When we met them, they're pretty, they're a really small company, and they do mostly rain gardens and kind of like irrigation type stuff. And we asked them if they're interested in working on this project. And Bencho told me he had never installed permeable pavers. He had installed pavers, but not permeable pavers. And I was like, you can just learn. You can use this project as a way to learn, and we trust you, and take your time. And that's what they did. And they're standing on the pavers that they installed. So now these folks can add that to their portfolio, that they can actually do, fancy schmancy LEED certified type work, right? And they can actually expand their work. So this is sort of construction photos. I'm going to zip through these rather quickly just so that you can kind of get an idea of what they did. They poured all these curbs, they put in these gravel paths, they did plantings, they installed this little stage, a footbridge, and they did this, with just pretty simple plans, and we kind of gave them liberty to, do how they felt was best. And that's what it looks like as of last summer. It's pretty beautiful. The plants are coming in pretty nicely. It's very sweet. The staff at Powell Butte were really okay with watering it over the summer. Last summer was a major heat wave, and we were like, you gotta water it. So they've been really great about that. We gave them some sprinklers, and the staff are just really excited. They've already told us that the classrooms right here that face this area are significantly cooler than they were before. The custodian came out and told me that he's in there a lot of days waxing the floors and cleaning, and that it's so much more pleasant because he's no longer burning up. So that was really nice to hear. We also work with some contractors. I mentioned Greenworks earlier. R&H Construction also donated their time to help us put in these boulders, a boulder climber. They came out and did some concrete pouring, helped us lay out the logs. This is them donating their time to install these logs. That's sort of what it looks like now from that angle. And we also had the high schoolers across the street. A lot of them actually attended this elementary school when they were kids. They came out too, and they were giving back. So that's what it looks like now. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Katya. I love that. When you first shared your slides with me and I looked at the before and after, I was like, wow, that is way better. Yeah, it's super cool work. Thank you for sharing. And thank you. Yeah, thank you for to all the speakers. That I don't know. It wasn't enough. Obviously, everyone's wanting a little bit more. But the good news is we get to talk to each other. So we're not too bad. We're a little over time. So we'll probably shave a few minutes off the breakouts. So we had 30 minutes planned. We'll probably maybe cut that to 25 minutes for our breakout groups. We are, I think, just going to have 6 breakouts. So we will, yeah, so to facilitators 7 and 8, I think you know who you are. You are off the hook and you can just participate. And for facilitators 1 to 6, you will be hosting your breakout. So everyone will be randomly assigned except for facilitators and note takers. And then they have some instructions for you when you get there. So we'll take about 25 minutes to connect and discuss, and then come back as a group in about 25 minutes.